Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. The people of Sahul. There was once a primitive human civilization in the southern hemisphere 75,000 years ago. As you may already know, humans evolved into the beings we are today about 300,000 years ago, spreading from Africa into Europe and then gradually migrating across the entire world. And while civilization may not have been particularly advanced back then, people did still live in small societies. Researchers now believe they have identified the first humans to move across the ancient supercontinent of Sahul 75 to 50,000 years ago. Sahul was an enormous landmass composed of Australia, Tasmania, New Guinea, and the Aru Islands. It wasn't as big as Pangaea, but was certainly a lot larger than modern-day Australia. Researchers believe it took the first humans who arrived in this part of the world about 10,000 years to explore the continent. So, they put together detailed maps and charts showing where they believe migration routes would have occurred. If humans arrived in the northern part of the island, they wouldn't have reached the southern tip, which is now the island of Tasmania, for at least 9,000 years. Researchers haven't found any real physical evidence of the ancient migration routes. What they go off of is all based on computer models. In fact, scientists still don't know how humans even found their way to the supercontinent so long ago. They would have needed boats, meaning that prehistoric humans likely had access to small ships. Whatever the case, the people of Sahul would eventually become the ancient ancestors of modern indigenous Australians. And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Knight and Salty 82nd Veteran for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Number 9. The Tana Taraja. The land of Taraja in southern Sulawesi, Indonesia, is home to the ancient Taraja culture. They are one of the most ancient cultures in the world that still has a strong and stable population. There are over 1 million of these people living in the region of Tana Taraja, and while some of them have been converted to Christianity or Islam, there are still some who hold strong to the ancient beliefs. They are the ones who still practice a type of animist religion called Aluk Todolo, or Way of the Ancestors. It's difficult to say how long these people have been living in Indonesia. The Dutch established a trading route in the region in the 17th century, and then, for 200 years, they ignored the mountains in Sulawesi where the Torajans were living. Access to the area was difficult, and there was clearly nothing to be gained from agriculture, so the whole society was left alone. Nobody even knew they existed as the Dutch busied themselves on the coastlines. It wouldn't be until the late 19th century that the Taraja were discovered and converted to Christianity. They'd been operating in autonomous villages, minding their own business, and living peacefully off the land for so long that none of them could remember their true origins. It's possible that they may have been part of this jungle for thousands of years, living as primitively as some tribes still do in the Amazon. But all that changed in the 1900s, and by the 1970s, they were a prime tourist destination. The Taraja were even studied like zoo animals by anthropologists, and by the 1990s, the Taraja were completely different people. These days, they still hold on to many of their ancestral values. Many worshippers of their true religion believe that their ancestors came down from heaven using a great staircase, sent into the world by the creator god Matua. They also hold strange funerary rites in which effigies of the deceased are put inside hollowed caves and made to look out at villages, and they even dress up their dead and change their clothes. This is because they believe the soul of the dead lingers around the village for a very long time, and so their body must be kept in good condition. Number 8. The New World Jamon. The Jamon culture was a very mysterious and ancient civilization that lived in Japan. This was long before the warrior monks or the feudal battles of the medieval days. The Jamon lived between roughly 14,000 and 2,300 years ago. The Jamon period was a long stretch of time that saw primitive hunter-gatherers evolve into agriculturists. They basically went from the Stone Age to the age of farming. In 1998, the oldest pottery fragments in all of Japan were discovered at the ancient site of Odai Yamamoto I, and amazingly, they dated back to 14,500 BC. The Jamon were also exceptional because of their strange dogu figurines. These statues have been found all throughout Japan, and many of them are thousands of years old. The Jamon had a bizarre obsession with creating sculptures of figures that look an awful lot like aliens, with big eyes, space helmets, and exaggerated bodies. Many have suggested the Jamon had contact with extraterrestrials long before other cultures. But here's something else that's crazy about the Jamon. There is a theory that says Jamon fishermen traveled to South America about 5,000 years ago. They supposedly landed in Ecuador and then populated the area. If true, it would mean that Stone Age people from Japan were in fact the first visitors to the New World long before the Spanish ever arrived. Number 7. The Tool Makers. Near Lake Victoria and Kenya, archaeologists have been busy excavating an ancient set of stone tools. These tools are likely the oldest that have ever been found on our planet. They predate the ancient seafarers of Sahul by a significant amount. Scientists say the tools were crafted during the Pliocene epoch, roughly 3 million years ago. That means they weren't used by Homo sapiens, and that a totally different, advanced civilization was the first known toolmakers. These stone tools are called the Oldowan artifacts. They represent an unprecedented leap forward in primitive technology, but they come with a bit of mystery, of course. Scientists in Kenya haven't found any fossilized remains of human ancestors at the site. They only discovered a pair of giant molars belonging to the ape creature called Paranthropus. And while this ancient ape-like animal was distantly related to humans, it was a totally separate animal from the Homo genus. It shared similar traits, but wasn't a direct ancestor. This revelation has left scientists baffled. Here we have potentially the oldest set of tools in the world, obviously built by an advanced race of beings. Not advanced enough to build pyramids or temples, but certainly smarter than your average monkey. And yet the only fossils in the area belong to primitive, ape-like beings. It almost looks like there was an intelligent species of ape long before members of the Homo genus became intelligent. It's a big discovery that could completely change history as we know it. Number 6. The Wasteca. The Wasteca civilization lived along the Gulf Coast of Mexico, but they were largely centered in the area that's now the state of Veracruz. They are one of the least studied Mesoamerican cultures, with scientists knowing very little about their society or belief system. What we do know is that they were an early branch of the Maya civilization, a group that split off on its own around 2000 BC. The Wasteca separated themselves from the Maya, moved away from the thick jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, and began roaming north. They built their own great cities starting around 1200 AD, after the Maya civilization had collapsed. Their separation from the Maya saved them from utter destruction. They soon began developing ways to manipulate metal and became big producers of copper alloys. Then the Aztec Empire came down on them with fire and fury in the 15th century. Scientists think the Aztecs likely demanded tribute payments, and in exchange, they would allow the Wasteca to continue existing. The Wasteca wasn't the most organized culture in the world. They made great advancements in the world of metallurgy, but they weren't exactly politically unified. They managed to escape the Maya, only to establish a group of city-states constantly bickering with one another. Number 5. The Sohei. The Sohei weren't exactly a civilization. They were more like an elite group of ancient warrior monks. They came into being during the early Middle Ages when Japan was largely occupied by Buddhists. And while Buddhism is usually thought of as a peaceful religion, that hasn't always been the case, especially in feudal Japan. Nothing was ever peaceful. It wasn't so much that there were rival Buddhist sects, though. This wasn't like early Christianity, which had a dozen different belief systems that all hated each other. It was more politically charged, with different schools of Buddhism backed by certain political organizations. Sometimes, It was just as simple as one temple disagreeing with the views of another temple, and so their monks had to fight each other. It all started in 970 AD, when a disagreement broke out between the monks of the Enryaku-ji shrine and the Yasaka shrine in Kyoto. The Yasaka shrine became the first to establish its own army of standing warrior monks. These monks were nothing to mess with either. They were forbidden from leaving Mount Hai as they trained for 12 straight years to be ruthless warriors. Squabbles amongst the various temples became less important as Japan was plunged into deadly fighting between warring clans. Even with mighty armies of samurai, many of the most powerful clans in feudal Japan tried desperately to employ the services of the Sohei warrior monks. They wouldn't fall out of favor until 1571. That was when the first unifier of Japan, Oba Nobunaga, destroyed the monks of Mount Hai to keep them from rebelling against him, massacring about 20,000 people in the process. Number 4. Minoan star paths. The ancient Minoan culture may have used the stars to create celestial star paths, which they used to navigate the Mediterranean Sea 3,000 years ago. The Minoan civilization appeared around 2600 BC on Greece's island of Crete. They were rediscovered in the 19th century by British archaeologist Arthur Evans. The Minoans are now known for their impressive architecture. They built huge palaces, subterranean labyrinths, and they sailed the Mediterranean Sea with ease. But when Alessandro Berio recently examined some of their ruined palaces, he was shocked to find that they were oriented along navigational directions. Alessandro looked at the huge central courts of the old palaces of the Minoan kings, and amazingly, he discovered that they were perfectly aligned with the rising and setting of main navigational stars. But what does this have to do with celestial star paths? Alessandro believes the alignment of the palaces could show just how important constellations were to the ancient Minoan sailors. It seems clear the Minoans had an advanced understanding of the stars. It could be that they used specific paths taken by the stars as routes to their foreign commercial hubs. In other words, they made maps based entirely on the way the stars moved at night. This would have made it extremely easy to sail from one place to another, assuming it wasn't too cloudy. Number 3. The Hittite Empire. The Hittite Empire emerged in ancient Anatolia around 1650 BC. This incredibly advanced culture likely moved into the region from the north, going from Europe into Asia Minor. They were advanced in a few major ways. They were amazing at producing iron, they ruled their kingdom using an advanced system of government, and they practiced the worship of storm gods, something fairly unique even in the ancient world. While most people worshipped the sun, the Hittites worshipped the storm. Their main deity was Tarhuna, king of Kimiya, lord of the land, king of heaven. Technology was rapidly spreading 3,600 years ago. At the time, horses were being domesticated and used for long-distance travel, and wagons were making trade more lucrative. The Hittite Empire used war, iron, and all the technology at their disposal to conquer their enemies. They succeeded as a warlike civilization all the way until the surprise appearance of the Sea People, who came in boats from parts unknown and ravaged the coastlines, disrupting every civilization in the area. The Hittites fractured during the chaos, and by 1180 BC, they had splintered into small factions and lost most of their power. Number 2. The Oyo Empire. The Oyo Empire was a great and mighty civilization that emerged fairly recently in southwest Nigeria. It was only about 400 years ago in the 17th century that the Oyo became an advanced power in Nigeria thanks to military dominance. Unfortunately, the kingdom has a very dark history. After gaining control over the region using a formidable army of cavalry, the Oyo began to participate in the slave trade. From their capital at Old Oyo, they helped move slaves from Africa's interior to the coastline. They then shipped these people, often kidnapped from small villages and tribes, away on European sailing ships. The trade became so lucrative that the area became known as the Slave Coast. But the history of the Oyo goes back even further. Archaeologists believe they were the descendants of the much earlier Nok culture, who prospered in Nigeria starting about 2,500 years ago. They were one of the original advanced civilizations of Africa. It was the success of the Nok culture that paved the way for the Oyo to have cultural dominance in the region. By the 18th century, roughly half the slaves that were exported from Africa came from an area controlled by the Oyo Empire, with help from the Kingdom of Dahomey. But Islam was sweeping through the region, and it wouldn't be long before it spread into Oyo, ultimately destroying the empire. These days, the region is ruled by small chieftains, almost as if they have gone back in time. Number 1. The Sodales Agustales. In ancient Rome, the Sodales Agustales were an order of priests whose responsibility was to maintain the cult of Augustus. They were established in 14 AD by Emperor Tiberius as a way to give the ruler even more power. They were essentially part of a religious organization that wasn't dedicated to the worship of a deity, but to the human ruler of the Roman Empire. Prominent citizens would be picked from councils to act as ambassadors and reinforce the emperor's status as a divine being. Ancient Rome was a very strange place. They may have been one of the most advanced civilizations of their day, but they had too many religions. Rome was also a hotbed of religious cult activity. Yes, people worshipped the traditional Roman gods like Jupiter and Mars, but they also worshipped Greek gods like Apollo and Dionysus. Then there were the mystery cults, underground religions so secretive we don't even know what they were about. It's no surprise that when it came to keeping power, Romans turned to cult activity. The Sodales Agustales, with the most important members of the community at its forefront, acted as support for the emperor. They did this by holding regular ceremonies in honor of the emperor, even completing sacrifices in his name. They played a massive role in promoting the emperor as someone the people should look up to. By performing similar rituals in the name of the emperor as they did in the name of their gods, the Sodales Agustales were able to elevate whoever happened to be sitting on the throne. But this only lasted so long. As the Roman Empire began to weaken, and it became obvious the emperors were mostly corrupt men with too much power, the cult lost its relevance. Thanks for watching! Which of these ancient groups did you like the most? Let me know in the comments below and let me know what you'd like to hear more about. Be sure to subscribe and I'll see you next time. Bye!